So I do see a lot of these types of questions on various social media platforms, and I'm going to do this one live. I've not really looked at it before, but it's some sort of question here, and basically the user's got to choose between 4 different outputs, and you might have a view as to what the answer already is. But what I see here is that there's a function in Python basically, and that function takes in something. It takes in an object. It's not really defined what that object is. And then it checks the type of the object, because this is instance. So we'll go through all of this in the actual code. The isinstance function, I believe it checks the type of the object. And if it's a list, okay, then it takes out, or sorry, it sets the first element to the number 2, and then it returns back the whole object, which is the item, and then it looks like it returns that. So my guess, and I don't know, I should really draw some lines on that or something about that. So it takes this item here, and it basically this instance does this comparison between these two things. And so if this one is a list, then it's going to transform the first element of the list, because item 0 is the first element, and it's going to return that there, and whatever it returns here. Now I guess the reason the question is asked is because of the mutability in Python. I'm presuming that it's returning the same object each time because lists are mutable. So my first comment on that is that, so if I just get rid of that, my first comment might be something like, I'm just going to put a little text box here, but lists are mutable, right? Which means that you're always kind of like getting a reference to them. So that would mean in our drawing that if this was a list, and this is a list, because let's have a look, values there, that to me, I don't know if it's a list actually, because here's the trick. This bit here, this bracket here, is actually a tuple, which is immutable. So the person who's asked the question has stuck a mutable item, which is this bit here. They've stuck a mutable item into an immutable one with the brackets over here. So it's just one of these ones where it's asked in a complicated way. So it'll be interesting to see what it is, and really, like, sometimes with these, it's easier to actually debunk it with the code. It's by doing it in the code, and kind of like you can traverse through and do that. So that's kind of like what I'm going to do. So as with most of these, they post them as pictures. So if you do want to do it, you've got to rewrite out the code, but that's perfectly fine because we want to get it in that format anyway. So let me hit clear at the bottom, clear. Over here we don't need that. And also I will zoom in. So I think that we're looking at mutability and also is instance. So I'm going to start with a template. That's my main templates, right? I started to do this quite a bit now because it's a little bit cleaner because we can put our functions in there. Now, from our main, I'm literally going to be copying out this little block of code, and then we'll run it, and then we'll see what actually happens from there. So the first bit is I'm going to do the def of the function. Well, I've got that kind of like all set up. They called it func, so I will call it func just to be in sync with that. They had no docstring, but really we should put in a docstring of some point. And one thing that we're going to do is we are going to run, well, this is our main block of code. So I guess we're going to set values equals to, and this is the thing, it's a tuple that contains a list, and the list is 1, 2, 3. And that's literally just a copy and paste of this bit here, values equals 1, 2, 3, just over here. And we're going to want to do print func of values afterwards. So let's just get that one done as well, which is print. By the way, I really highly recommend not writing code like this. because it's kind of like someone has to decrypt it. And even if you're relatively good, if you wrote code in a convoluted way, you sort of like have to decrypt it. But I think the purpose of this is more for the understanding of this part here, this mutability, you know, and then possibly other features inside of there. And also, I'm going to say nested functions, because there's a function nested inside of another function. Is there function return? I wonder why there's two return items actually. Oh no, there's not two returns actually. It's not nested. We've basically got an if statement, and if something is true, what actually happens here in our little piece of code, if I can sort of go back to it, is we get one of two things happening. One or two things. Basically, so I should have actually highlighted that when I said it right in the beginning, but this is the whole first look of everything. If this is a list, then we get the amendment. So we get the first item of the list being set to the value of 2. And if it's not a list, then it's just going to return back the original item, whatever it is. So I think that it's actually not a list, because this is not a list. So I'm presuming that it now looks like, in my mind, that this gets returned back. But still, it's like not 100% obvious. But that's potentially what it is in this case. So func values, print func values. Okay. And even this, the print func values, I might actually take the function values and put it in a line on it, like set it equal to an answer and then print that answer, because then we can test the type of the answer. So we'll crack on with doing that anyway. So let's just have a look. I'm actually interested. I don't know what the output of this code is actually going to be. This is all live. So let's just get it done. So we're going to do, well, here we had this print func values. But the first thing that I'm going to do actually on that is just say that like our result is equal to func values, like this. And then over here we'd actually want to print, if we move this line down, we can print result. Right, just a little bit cleaner for the purpose of debunking what we've actually got. Now, you could also say that you should just put it into a script and not have these functions, and that could well be right. But I try to modularize everything now just for the sake of, you know, it's kind of like good practice, should we say. So let's get this actual function running. So this function takes in an argument item, and we don't know what this argument is. It's actually an any. Any. I don't know if any. No, it won't be like that, will it? Any. No, it's not. I think that would fail. But if we were type hinting, it looks like it could be anything. Now, I guess if I hover over it, if I haven't done anything there, it does say any anyway. So, but really, if we're going to, I think it's from typing import any. Right. In order to understand what we've got, I believe that it's actually of this type, right? Because anything can go into it, and the reason why is we're sort of like checking for what it actually is. And there's no comment, and the doc string would make it very useful, we'd understand. But anyway, let's just continue into the function, which is if is instance. And we see here, if I hover over the is instance, return whether an object is an instance of a class or a subclass thereof. So we're just checking that basically if whatever this item is, because we don't know what the type of the item is, because it's actually of type any, so we're going to check if it's a list, right? And this is where it becomes maybe a bit more obvious. Then item 0, so the first element of it, if it is a list, will be assigned the value 2. It's not equal to 2, it's assigned the value of 2. And then we can return, so we're going to break out this function and we will get return back item. So we're going to give back here, in this particular case, what we're returning back, we are returning back a list. Now, let's have a look here. It actually says list and none at this point in time. We see list and none. But actually, the next bit is return. If it's not true, then we're going to return. We'll get to this point, and then item, right? And what we're going to get, you can see here now, we get a list in the type hint already. If I can hover over it enough, I wonder if I can move up. Yeah, there we go. we get list or any over here. It's kind of like already recognizes, because this one's going to return back a list over here, and this one would return back an any. But we can actually type into it, like, you know, this is helpful for the user, which is it gives you back a list, or that's not the or sign, that's the or sign, any. Right, there we go. So it's probably a clear, like, that's really actually what's happening. And if the person had written this, it would be back, it would be potentially a little bit clearer. And that's basically it. So we're going to take, we don't need this other return, sorry, this one gets grayed out because now we've returned everything that's possible to return, and I think that was the end of that function. So we could actually just run the code, we'll get our answer back. But let's say we didn't run the code. I just wonder what comes in here. This is still values is a list of ints. So that's interesting because it says it's of type list based. Actually a tuple, but is a tuple a list? A tuple is definitely mutable. I wonder if we could just, we'll just run it and see, but then afterwards we can sort of like debug it and see what's actually happening. So all that's happening here with this if name equals main is basically we're going to run this main block of code, and then the main block of code is going to put the values, whatever this is, into our values. And you know, the interesting bit would be like we could do print here, type. Right, because that's the confusing bit, like what is this values right over there. And in fact, maybe the first bit I'll do is we can just do a return. Just before we actually get the answer, we'll do a return. Now this all gets grayed out because we're just going to exit quite quickly. But what we're just going to see the type of value. So, and the answer to this, or when I run the piece of code, well, I could run it, you know what, I might run it in the interactive shell actually. So just because it'd be a bit nicer. So control return just to run it in the interactive shell. And we get class list that comes back over here. So this print here, this is a list, which then means, so this is quite interesting. It then means if this is a list, we're checking here that item 0. Now, the next thing that we might want to do is, I wonder if print, if it is a list, then we can print the length of our list of values, right? That's actually what's going to come back first. So we're still going to break early. Now, okay, it's actually a list of 3 things. Okay, fine. So this isn't a tuple. That's interesting. Although, because I thought it might have been a list of a list containing a list, but it's not. So it's a list and it's containing 3 items, and we could even see, because we could do this, right? Print, okay, values, and then 0. And that should be the first item of the list, if that's true, which will be item number 1, because remember it's 0 indexing, so that's 0, that's item 1, and that's item number 2. So let's just run that. And indeed we get 1. So we're definitely getting into this function now. We're definitely getting in this function a list. So, right, so yeah, let's continue with this. So we're definitely getting that list is what we said in here. So in terms of what's happening, we've done our print. So what's going in here is a list. So this is going to be invoked. And the first item of it, this is going to be this 1, 2, 3. So this is literally going to go in here because it's done the check now effectively. That's what's going to happen. So it's got this 1, 2, 3, and then it's going to set the first item. So it's going to say, okay, let's change this to a 2. That's actually what's going to happen in the code, and it's going to return that. So I can't remember what I said, but I think there was one of the options for it, if I can pull it back up. I think my initial thing was I said initially it would be that, but now it looks like it's going to be B, which is 2, 2, and 3. It's going to return a list 2, 2, and 3. That's what it looks like. So I wonder if there's any more debunking to do, but that's kind of like the guess of what it's going to be. So we'll return it. I think that's going to be basically it. So that might be the end of it. Let's have a little look and try and do this then. So we're going to remove the type because there's no need to have that in here. I guess I'll actually delete it, not even comment it out. I'll delete this one. Control Z, let's have a look. Yeah, we don't need any of the, you know what, I'll just comment them out now. We don't need any of those, and we don't need to return early because we're actually going to now do the function. Okay, is there another caveat thrown in there? I'm just wondering. The result is going to be a function of this item. I don't think so. Values is just passed in here. We do our function. This function, the result of this function, in our particular case, the result will be this one, which is a list, and it's going to be a list of 221. So it looks like this is what the answer is going to be. So now we just hit return and run it, and indeed we get 223. So that's kind of like the debunking of it. I don't know what you got at first in terms of answers, like if you did kind of like know it straight off the bat, but the one bit that threw me, I guess, was that I thought when I saw the list inside the brackets that the list was actually got turned into a tuple, because interestingly enough, and here's why. So it's quite a little nuance, and this is more about understanding Python, and I certainly will be putting ambiguous stuff like that in there. But if this was, so in fact, let's just do sort of like values. We'll just overwrite values equals, and then this was something like naught, or we'll do that 100, for example. Over here, what do we get back? And it says it's a literal. Okay, so whatever goes in the brackets here, it's not. It looks like it's not a tuple until 200. It's not a tuple in Python by the looks of it until you put in a comma. So that's the nuance actually, because over here when I do that, it's not a tuple. So very interesting. It's something about Python. I guess it's the brackets that gives you some flexibility, but it only becomes a tuple. We see this here because we can actually do this, which is, although this is, and I won't call it values, I'll just call it V, right? But V equals 100, and we could say V1 actually, and here's the key to a large part of it. V2 equals 100, comma, equals 100, 200. If we print type of V1 and then type of V2, although we're going to also get our answer back at the end, because our answer is going to be this 223, unless we put the return statement a bit earlier, we're going to actually get the types coming back first from V1 and V2. And if we do run that, I press an F5 to run it, but anyway, I'll actually run it I'll hit clear just so that we don't need this. Clear, because everything's running in the interactive session anyway. I just do a run here, but we see that we get back an int over in this case, and here we've got a tuple of ints, and so that would have been the interesting one, because you could ask a new question, which is kind of like if that was in there, because this would then be a tuple, the first index. I wonder what would happen in that one. We could pass all different things in there, but here it looks like it would just be a tuple that comes back. And let's have a little think. Yes, it would be, and it wouldn't classify as a list. Then in that case you get a tuple back. So we could actually pass that in. So we could experiment with all of these different things. You could ask the question in many different ways. I could then just stick V2 in there, which is our tuple like object instead, and it should just return a tuple back. So let's have a look. So you could, and there we go, it does. So it's quite interesting. When there's one item in the brackets, it's not a tuple, and when there's multiple items, it is a tuple. So there we go. That's a nice little nuance in Python. We've got the isinstance, and we've got I guess something really actually, and this is really about typing or type hinting, which is number one. You should kind of like comment if you're going to do something that's ambiguous. You should sort of like I'm going to say comment. I think you should type hint to say what it is, but basically it checks, because if you did see this checks if item is array, if it is returns the first value, and I'm going to call it a list, not an array, sorry, because an array is slightly different. The difference between an array and a list in Python, where it's subtle, but an array is kind of like a contiguous block. I'd define an array much closer to like a NumPy array, so it's a list in our case. So it returns a list, otherwise else returns, and otherwise it returns the item. Right, whatever the item was. And we could even say args, right, because this is literally what it is. So hit return again on that. Maybe indentation, but basically args. You know, what's it actually taking in? The first thing is this item, which can be basically anything. So it's, you know, if you were hinting it's anything, but basically something like any item type. And then what does it return back? It either returns, and this is kind of the proper commentary, but if what's it going to return? It will return either a list if the argument was a list, otherwise the initial object. I just call it the initial object otherwise. So it's something like this, really. I wonder if I don't want to make it too whatever, but let's have a look. Let's kind of like do that. And if you were to then hover over it to see what it is, okay, that didn't really add much value putting the dashes in there. But something like this, which is like, and then you could kind of like see when you called your function over here somewhere, wherever we called it, we can then see what it actually does. So why does it say the docstring? Got to control less on it, I wonder. Let's have a look. It still says function, the function docstring. What's that on about? But anyway, over here it says checks if an item is a list, it amends. I think I spelled amends wrong because I always do. I think that's got one M in it. But basically it tells this would have been much more helpful if it did. And then if you did have that as a user, you'd read it and then you wouldn't have to debunk it. But basically it checks if item is a list. If it is, amends the first value of the list and then returns a list. Otherwise, else it returns an item, and it just says here the arguments that go in here, which is item, and it is any type, and we see that it's any from here, and then what can come back. What it gives you back is a list if the argument was a list, and otherwise it returns an object. And it would be clearer to do something like that. So that's basically it. That's kind of like type hinting, and also I guess brackets, tuples, potentially tuples, or objects in Python. What are they? What are the object types in Python? And checking the instance, the isinstance, what type of the object is in Python. So that's it. If you found this helpful or useful, it was it was quite a tricky question to be given, but they always do give you the tricky questions. If you like this video, subscribe, hit the like button, forward on to others, follow, because it'd be quite useful. And that's really it. Thanks a lot for watching.